The first roller coasters were all made out of wood, but for a long time, this limited what they could do. Designers couldn't be as innovative as they can these days, but that all changed in 1959 with an entirely new type of roller coaster track. Walt Disney had envisioned a roller coaster that weaved in and out of a Matterhorn mountain. Due to the need for tight twists and turns in the track, he knew that wooden coaster track would not work for such a ride. Walt Disney reached out to ride manufacturer Aero Development, who had a strong track record with building rides for Disneyland, including the Carousel, the Flying Dumbo Ride, the Circus Train, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and the Mad Tea Party. Aero had created a new type of coaster track made of tubular steel rails. Due to steel being stronger and more versatile than wood, this would allow for roller coasters to do things that it never could before. In addition to tighter twists and turns, they could be made taller and longer and even go upside down. On top of this, steel coasters were capable of giving a much smoother ride experience and required far less maintenance than wooden coasters. And it all started with Matterhorn bobsleds at Disneyland. Or so we thought. That's right, while it was the first with tubular steel rails, there actually were steel coasters long before. So since we've already covered wooden coaster firsts, let's go through how the steel coaster came to be and all of the other steel coaster firsts. Welcome to Ejector Airtime, and this is Roller Coaster Firsts, Part 2. Before we get into this, make sure you take the time to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, as that will really help against the YouTube algorithm. Also, I should mention, this video does not intend on covering every single type of steel coaster in operation, but I will highlight as many as I can. As I was saying, there were steel coasters before Matterhorn bobsleds opened at Disneyland in 1959. Early examples featured rails that resembled those used for railroad tracks. This would have made the rails heavy, probably expensive to build, and not as easy to bend into turns. So what was really the first ever steel coaster? Well, it's quite difficult to find a very accurate answer. Since a number of old railways were later used as rides for thrilling guests, they could go back as far as wooden coasters do. On Roller Coaster Database, the oldest steel roller coaster mentioned is a ride called the Royal Scooter, which opened in upstate New York back in 1885. Ian F. Myler has been building roller coasters as early as the 1940s with a track style that has more of an I shape. This has been ideal for their kids and family coasters, as well as their Wild Mouse design. One of their best examples is the Wild Chipmunk, which has been in operation since 1955. But when the tubular steel rail coaster came along, it allowed for another coaster renaissance to take off. Aero Development, or as they would be known later, Aerodynamics, continued to develop their steel coaster model, becoming the dominant coaster manufacturer of the next 3 decades. In 1966, Aero opened their next major coaster in the Runaway Mine Train at Six Flags Over Texas. This coaster featured wooden supports and a number of buildings and scenery to create a more thrilling ride experience with many near-miss elements. Aero Mine Trains quickly became a popular coaster of choice for new parks looking for a great opening day attraction. Around the same time, other manufacturers were getting into the steel coaster market. Pinfari with their Zyklon and Schwarzkopf with their Jetstar and Wildcat models quickly became popular with smaller parks and traveling carnivals. These are models that have been heavily cloned and can still be found in various parks today. But in 1975, Aero would grab everyone's attention once again. Knott's Berry Farm opened the first modern coaster to flip riders upside down with a corkscrew. While not that groundbreaking by today's standards, this was a next-level thrill attraction at the time. With 2 inversions known as a double corkscrew, this coaster opened the floodgates for more thrilling coasters. The following year, the aforementioned Schwarzkopf opened the first modern roller coaster to feature a vertical loop. Revolution at Six Flags Magic Mountain featured what is known today as the clothoid loop. Now, what's the difference between this and the loops of the earlier days? Well, remember how the Flip-Flop Railway had a loop that was perfectly circular? The clothoid loop has more of an upside-down teardrop shape. This allows trains to enter the loop with a more gradual transition, thus alleviating the amount of G-forces and making it more comfortable for the riders. Pretty soon, every modern steel roller coaster going forward would feature some type of inversion. Aero's corkscrew wasn't just the first modern coaster to go upside down, it was also the first with 2 inversions. Aero would go on to break their own inversion record 5 times. This started in 1976 with Cedar Point's Corkscrew, the first coaster with 3 inversions. One more inversion was added to each coaster as they went on to construct Carolina Cyclone at Carowinds in 1980, Viper at Darien Lake in 1982, Vortex at Kings Island in 1987, and Shockwave at Six Flags Great America in 1988. Arrow had a tendency of reusing their inversions in a copy-paste style. Pretty much every inversion on each coaster was exactly the same as the one before, but they did still create a few new inversions nobody had ever seen before. Loch Ness Monster at Busch Gardens Williamsburg became the first and remains today as the only roller coaster in the world to feature interlocking vertical loops. Another that featured this element came with another first of its kind as well. Orient Express, which opened at Worlds of Fun and operated there from 1980 to 2003, was the first coaster to feature the Batwing element. This element features a combination of half loops and corkscrews to flip riders over twice before sending them back the way that they came. According to RCDB, the first roller coaster to feature the Sidewinder element is the now defunct Dragon at Ocean Park in Hong Kong. This element is often referred today as an Immelmann, or a reverse dive loop, taking its name from a German stunt pilot's signature maneuver. Also according to RCDB, the first coaster to feature what is known today as the Cobra Roll, due to its shape resembling the Cobra's head, was the first Boomerang coaster, which opened in 1984. This coaster can be found today at Six Flags Mexico and was designed by Dutch manufacturer Vekoma. During the 80s, Arrow started to break away from their standard looping coasters and gave us a new way of experiencing the ride. The Bat at Kings Island, which opened in 1981, was the first full-size suspended coaster. This type of coaster featured trains that hang below the track and are free to swing from side to side. The Bat unfortunately closed 2 years later due to mechanical problems, but several improved suspended coasters would open just a few years later, including the iconic Big Bad Wolf at Busch Gardens Williamsburg in 1984. Just 1 year prior, Worlds of Fun got an interesting gimmick added to one of their coasters. Arrow had previously built a clone of their Corkscrew coaster for the park in 1976, but in 1983, it was given new trains in which riders stood up for the entire ride. This was the very first stand-up coaster, but the trains were removed at the end of the season due to the amount of stress they were putting on the coaster track. But in 1984, a company called Togo, based out of Japan, would design the first ever coaster made for stand-up trains, the King Cobra, which opened at Kings Island in Ohio. Togo wasn't the only Japanese coaster company on the market. In 1983, Meisho built a coaster unlike any other up to that point at Fuji-Q. This coaster, called Moonsault Scramble, was a large shuttle coaster whose track reached a height of 229 feet, making it the first coaster to exceed 200 feet. This was a particularly intense coaster due to the inversion being quite small, capable of maxing out at 6.5 Gs. The height record on this coaster is often debated though, due to the fact that not all of the cars on the train actually reached the highest point. But back in the States, Arrow was preparing to wrap up the decade by starting a war. Cedar Point would open the first continuous circuit coaster exceeding 200 feet. Magnum XL 200 would debut as the world's first hypercoaster. This was a term Cedar Point came up with to define any coaster whose height exceeded 200 feet tall. Little did they know that this coaster would kick off what became known as the Coaster Wars, a period during the 1990s up into the early 2000s where every major amusement park started clamoring to break every roller coaster record possible. As the 80s gave way to the 90s, new manufacturers would also quickly enter the market, challenging Arrow for superiority. One of the most notable to come out of this period was Bolliger & Mabillard, or B&M for short. This team of Swiss coaster designers would emerge with glossy smooth coasters that were all designed with the aid of computers, something that Arrow refused to implement until it was almost too late. One of their most innovative designs was the inverted roller coaster. Rather than featuring swinging cars below the track, the trains would be rigidly fixed in place, allowing for a more thrilling experience that could flip riders upside down. They also had no floor, allowing riders' legs to dangle freely below. And when the first of these, Batman the Ride, opened at Six Flags Great America, B&M took the coaster world by storm. Soon, every major park was looking to get an invert. Arrow was starting to look a little bit outdated. The 90s also saw a number of coasters that didn't feature a chain lift, but rather a launch to get riders up to full speed. This wasn't exactly a new thing, though. Going back as far as 1977, we saw methods of launching a coaster such as a weight drop system, like on King Cobra at Virginia's King's Dominion, flywheels, like on Montezuma's Revenge at Knott's Berry Farm, and electric winches on Six Flags New England's Black Widow. All of these were used to quickly get a train up to full speed in just a matter of seconds. In 1996, King's Dominion as well as King's Island would debut a pair of identical coasters called Flight of Fear. These coasters were the first to feature an LIM-powered launch. This type of launch uses electromagnets to propel the coaster down the track very quickly, 0 to 55 miles per hour in only 4 seconds. LIMs, however, would quickly lose favor due to their high power demands and excessive maintenance. In 1997, Intamin would unveil their very own launch system. Superman the Escape at Six Flags Magic Mountain would become the first to utilize the LSM launch. This variation used magnets on both the track and on the train that activate in sync with one another. The result was the first roller coaster to reach 100 miles per hour. And while the cars don't reach the very top of the tower, this was the first roller coaster to reach a height in excess of 400 feet tall. The following year, in 1998, Intamin would create the first inverted roller coaster with a launch in Volcano the Blast Coaster at King's Dominion, which also used LSMs to launch their trains. Intamin really kicked it into high gear at the start of the new millennium. Cedar Point decided they wanted another record-breaking coaster, and Intamin delivered with the debut of Millennium Force, the first Giga Coaster, or the first continuous circuit coaster to exceed 300 feet tall. This was also their first roller coaster to feature an elevator cable lift system to get trains quickly and quietly to the top of the first hill. And just 3 years later, Cedar Point brought Intamin back once again to help them claim the height record. Top Thrill Dragster opened in 2003 as the world's first strata coaster, a continuous circuit coaster over 400 feet tall. With a height of 420 feet and a speed of 120 miles per hour, Cedar Point held the height and speed record for 2 years. King Dakar at Six Flags Great Adventure has held the height record since 2005, but even that coaster will soon be surpassed by Falcon's Flight, set to open at Six Flags Qiddiya in late 2024, as what is set to be called the world's first Exocoaster. This coaster is set to have a maximum height of 640 feet and a top speed of 155 miles per hour. While height and speed records are exciting to see broken, there have been a tremendous number of new types of roller coasters over the last 20 years thanks to the advent of steel track. In 1998, Oblivion at Alton Towers in England became the very first dive coaster. Designed by B&M, this coaster features a nearly vertical drop, but before you take the plunge, the coaster stops just over the edge for a few seconds to build anticipation. In 1999, Medusa at Six Flags Great Adventure opened as what B&M called the first floorless coaster. This coaster is more or less your typical sit-down looping coaster, but with no floor underneath you. I've ridden on 2 of these, and in the front row, it's like riding on the front bumper of a car because it looks like your feet could easily hit the track. Backing up to the mid-90s, B&M managed to break the inversion record that Arrow had been holding on to since Shockwave. 1995 saw the introduction of Dragon Con at Port Aventura in Spain, the first roller coaster to feature 8 inversions. This record wouldn't be broken again until 2002, when Intamin debuted Colossus at England's Thorpe Park, which features 10 inversions. 11 years later, another British park, Alton Towers, would take that record away. German manufacturer Gerstlauer created the first roller coaster to flip riders upside down a total of 14 times with the Smiler. During the golden era of wooden coasters, a unique ride called a Virginia Reel was introduced. This type of coaster had circular cars and were free to spin around throughout the course of their Wild Mouse-style layout. Unfortunately, none of these exist anymore. But in 1994, the first modern spinning coaster opened in Germany. Piraten Spinner offers a rather tame ride experience, but in 2004, Gerstlauer kicked it up a notch with a larger spinning coaster at Mall of America. With a top speed of 31 miles per hour and cars that spin based on the rider's weight distribution, this, along with its cloned counterparts, are appealing to both thrill seekers and younger riders alike. Jumping ahead to 2018, Mach Rides debuted the first extreme spinning coaster at Silver Dollar City in Branson, Missouri. Called Time Traveler, this massive coaster features a vertical drop right out of the station, 2 launches, and 3 inversions. In 2007, Intamin introduced the Zack Spin, a coaster that would freely flip riders upside down, similar to that of a zipper carnival ride. The first of these was Kimu at Linnanmäki in Finland. While not as popular as the SNS 40 free spin, which offers a similar but more comfortable ride, it created a new concept for parks with limited amounts of space to build in. Steel coasters have allowed us to experience a lot of new wild ways to ride, with new trains and unique restraint systems. In 2000, Vekoma introduced a coaster that gave the sensation of flying. Stealth at California's Great America, now Nighthawk at Carowinds, seats riders laying on their backs before flipping them over into a flying position. Only a few of these were built, and B&M later improved upon the design, but the feeling of flying is still one of the most exciting ways to experience a coaster. In 2004, Vekoma introduced Booster Bike at Toverland in the Netherlands. This coaster seats riders as if they were driving their own motorcycle, and in 2011, Raptor at Gardaland in Italy opened as the very first B&M Wing coaster. This one seats riders on either side of the track rather than above or below it. It's almost like you're riding on the wings of an airplane. But one of the most wild coaster experiences of recent years came in the form of the Fourth Dimension coaster. Designed by renowned engineer Alan Schilke, X2 and Six Flags Magic Mountain became the first coaster of this type, and unfortunately, this led to the end of Arrow. This coaster features two sets of rails on its track. One set is your standard running rails, but the second set is connected to a mechanical system on the trains that can move seats forward or backwards to flip riders to face a certain direction at any given point on the ride. If you watch X2 descend its first drop, you'll see that the riders start by facing straight down, but halfway through the drop, they flip over onto their backs. As you can see, steel has allowed the roller coaster to develop in ways that it never could before, and with so many more new styles on the horizon, there's plenty to get excited for. Recently, we've seen new designs such as single rail coasters, tilt coasters, hybrid coasters, and coasters with swing launches. S&S has even come up with what they are calling the Axis coaster, which can swing riders side to side on a track that can twist around itself. Steel coasters have redefined the theme park and the entertainment industry, and to think it all started nearly 60 years ago with Arrow and Disney. That's going to do it for this video. Let me know in the comments what your favorite coaster is. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to subscribe to Ejector Airtime so you don't miss any future content, and be sure to give this